Welcome to worship. Welcome to this time at 8:44. Our scripture this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, the 18th chapter. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused. But later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" This ends the reading from the Gospel of St. Luke. Thanks be to God. And as I was just thinking about, I'm sitting on my wire, about asking Dan to do this, I'm thinking, how would you feel if you were in the blue seat? Would you be comfortable to come up and chat? And so thanks, Dan, for doing this part. I'm going to do, and Dan has seen the part that I'm doing. So just a little bit of familiar, because as you know, I've just been with you a couple of weeks, and some of you may or may not know this part of my story, our story. So last September 1st, a day after I retired, I started working at Arcade Mission downtown. Dan and I worked together at the Central Y, where Arcade was located until April 1st of 2023. And in our work together at the Central Y, Dan's responsibilities were safety, security, and managing our community as they came into the Y. From 1 o'clock until 8 o'clock, the YMCA was open. And my responsibilities were advocate, outreach, and chaplaincy. And so that meant everything from working with the community who came in who were not paper ready. And when we use that expression, it means folk have no paper trail. They don't have a birth certificate, a social insurance number, they don't have an address because they're sleeping rough. Sometimes people were dropped off from Emerge at Vic or UH and said, here you go, or dropped off after incarceration. So my responsibility was to help people as we ventured into what is the mud of paperwork, I guess.
One way to look at it.
Pardon?
It's one way.
That's one way of looking at it. The Out of the Cold program began officially December 1st, and with funding from the city and governments from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 at night, the YMCA was open. And my responsibility, I was challenged to do, which is something outside of, it's not what they train you to do in seminary, was run the breakfast program. And so we fed anywhere from, I think the lowest we ever got was maybe 100 people at breakfast. We were often closer to 180 people for breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. And Dan then rule changed into door security, checking people in, and masking as well, and people's names as they came in. So we did that part together. And then at 8 o'clock at night, people could go over for St. Andrews, and there were about 45 beds that people could go and use. If they couldn't get into those beds, I called the cattle call, which is where people could go down by the police station and wait and see if there were going to be any crash beds available for people to use at my sister's place, Center of Hope, and there weren't many possibilities. So my responsibility changed as I was hospitality lead, because then I was coordinating and working with Dan, with other staff who were doing advocates, serving the meals, and helping that way. And as we said earlier with the children, Dan always had my back, and sometimes, we come from different backgrounds, and sometimes Dan was that grounding force. Because part of the reality is because of behavior, we tried not to use the term banning, but we literally had to have people removed from the space. And so sometimes Dan could find a way to say, or maybe they can we find them a cigarette? Can we take a break and have people go for a walk? Sometimes that worked, and other times we had to call London Foot Patrol because of violence that happened, or putting staff at risk or other members. So Dan, I think when you first were introduced to me, Mark Bellamy, who was a United Church minister who worked at Arcade as well, always said Dan was our best good news story. And so I thought, and then last year, I encouraged you as you went and talked to Western, to some of the classes, about your story as well.
Yeah, I spoke in front of a class for social studies for people that are going through the doctorates to be doctors, so that they could basically humanize their future clients, I guess.
And the gospel that I chose this morning about the widow and the judge, God says, will God not hear us and justice be done? And Dan, this morning as he come and continues to speak with us, helps us with how do we do justice? How as we Riverside do justice? How do you do justice in the community that they're in? And Jesus also told the parable beginning with, so we would pray and not be discouraged. So you wrote some questions on the board. I've shared them with Dan earlier this week. And Dan, I'll start, but I think we're going to go with whichever feels well for you as well, too. The first big question is people asking is, what led you to become homeless?
Well, in the beginning, just to put it mildly, I come from an era, along as most of you do too, where knowledge is power, and the more you know, the better off you are. Except where I come from in my town, if you know more than the people that are in power, the people that are in power take offense to that. And basically, for lack of a story here, I ticked off the wrong person, and my life was literally systematically destroyed by people in power where I come from. And by people in power, that means the police, that means Doctors, it means basically the mayoral candidates, anybody like that. And it didn't matter where I went to plead my case. It fell onto deaf ears, because where I come from, they all eat out of the same trough, if you understand what I'm getting at with that. And basically put whoever power that they had that was in charge would basically send it right down their line that I was not to be listened to, not to be dealt with, and basically put I was to be dealt with. Right down to the point that the chief of police at one point where I come from had a $1,000 hit on my head for any one of his officers that could actually make charges stick on me. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, spoon feed you a lot of unnecessary that I was innocent and this, that, anything else, because I did fracture a few laws, but when it boiled down to it, I was a lot smarter than they thought I was. I knew the law, I knew how to play the law, and I beat them at their own system. And they didn't like that. They took a massive offense to that, and basically to coin a term, they dogpiled me. They started dumping everything onto me all at once to the point that I was suffocating. And it led to a heart attack, and pretty much it went right downhill after that. I lost my job because all of a sudden I was off work for a broken hand. I had 9 surgeries in 3 years for a broken hand. And by the time that was all healed up and I went back to work, I was told I didn't have a job there. My paperwork for working there for 15 years had disappeared. It was like I never worked at this place a day in my life. So that was a part of it. And then they took my house from me. They mark it down as late payments, missed payments, anything like that. They were literally, money was disappearing out of my account. The bank manager had no idea where it was going to, and he couldn't offer any explanation. But the minute you walk into a bank and you make a stink about it, they have you drawn out of there and thrown into jail. I spent a lot of time in jail over other people's BS, for lack of another phrase. I basically ticked off the people in power. I don't really know how else to explain that. Hopefully none of you have ever had to go through that or never had to experience that, but I tell you, it's something that you don't want to experience. It even got to a point where, this is kind of an amusing story, but I kind of offered an olive branch. I wanted them off my back, and I just wanted to move on. So I tried to play nice, and this one police officer, on a really hot day, it's about, I think it was over 40 with the humidex and everything like that, I went to them and I offered them an ice cream sandwich that I had just gotten from the store and everything like that. And they hemmed and hawed, and I said, listen, I don't want any crap. I just, you look hot. So I just thought I'd offer an ice cream sandwich. So the officer accepted it, and I went about my day. Well, my day lasted about another half hour, because 30 minutes later, I was literally surrounded by 3 cars from the police force, and I was placed under arrest for attempted bribery of a police officer. Like, charges were made up on me on a daily basis. They were basically planting drugs at my house. I can't tell you how many times I caught police sitting in my garden with their ears to my window, right to the tune that at one point, 2 18-year-old, a guy and a girl, they broke into my house. And I had just moved into this place, and so I scared them out of my house. Like, I can be quite intimidating when I need to be. I know the law, which states you're allowed to defend your house to a certain degree, everything like that. But I never so much as laid a hand on these two kids. I just scared the crap out of them enough that they ran out of the house. Well, long story short, these two kids went to the police and said that I attacked them. Now, even though they had stated in their statements to the police that they had broken into my house, I was still placed under arrest for assaulting these two kids, and I never laid a finger on them, never so much as touched them. And I spent the next 3 months waiting inside the jail for my day in court for this. And in that time, I had lost my apartment because you can't pay rent while you're in jail. The job that I had at the time, which wasn't anything big, but it was still something. Basically, they let me go because, if you're not at work, you can't be there for attendance. All boils down to the fact that when you piss off, pardon me, when you tick off the people that have the power, they could really do a number on your life. And it got to a point where all the stress and everything, I had a heart attack behind the wheel. They took my driver's license from me. They made it impossible for me to live. And in the end, they didn't care. It's bad when you're being evicted out of a place and you have police officers watching you get evicted and they're singing a song that, the na 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 na, that type of song. And they're waving at me as I'm being escorted out of this place. Because where I'm from, if the police are involved with you at any stage of any development, you're kicked off welfare, you're kicked out of housing, and you can't even plead your case. It was bad. It was very bad. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all cops are bad or all people in power are bad, but there are a lot of people that shouldn't be where they are, and because they're there because of manipulation, threats, stuff like that there.
So Dan, did you become homeless then in that area and then you moved to London?
This is the third time I've lived in London.
In London, okay,
Yeah.
great.
I was here when I was younger, a couple of times, and then I came back here because honestly, where I'm from, there's nothing for men. There's no help for men. If I was a young lady, pregnant mother, that sort of thing, there's outstanding amount of support and everything like that. But because of my gender, I was basically left to my own devices. Like, here you go, enjoy your day, sorry about your luck.
So Dan, can you tell the folk about, because you lived in what we call tent cities, right?
Yes.
So can you, and I think there's lots of misconception about what that is other than people have planted tents and then they leave, but can you help people understand a little bit about where they're kind of located and what they are?
Well, tent city is more so you get a group of people that come together for safety. Living on the streets, there's a lot of safe and unsavory characters out there, and a large majority of the female population that's homeless. A lot can handle themselves, don't get me wrong. I've seen some very tough girls out there that could take down a lot of people if it boils down to it. But if Sue was to become homeless all of a sudden, one of the first things that anybody on the street will tell you is to try and find a partner, whether that's a girl, whether that's a guy, preferably it's a guy, because people will take advantage of the situation, whether that portrays of robbing her, beating her,
sexual assault,
anything like that. Yeah, people will take advantage of that, and they will basically try to manipulate that and keep her under a thumb, so to speak. But
And Dan, we saw more and more, because I am now over 60. There's a surprise if you wondered how old I'm now over 60. I think a lot of people don't realize that many people who are homeless are over 60. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's an older population of homeless people. Like I myself was homeless for just over 25 years. And fortunately, how I grew up, my grandfather, before he died, he taught me a lot about camping and hunting, fishing, and everything like that, because my own parents weren't really there for me. So I learned from my grandfather. So I had a leg up. That coupled with the fact that I'm I guess you could say quite bullheaded, that I don't take well the threats or anything like that, and I can't be intimidated. I was always somebody that would stand up for people like Sue, that would show up and, just confuddled, where their emotions and their mental state are just fluctuating like crazy because they have no idea what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. So my role, I guess, how to say that, my role on the street was, I was one of the protectors, I guess you could say. People would come to me and I'd help them out. I wouldn't BS them, I wouldn't lie to them. I'd tell them, okay, this is what you got to do to start. You need certain things. I'd point out people that they could actually go to talk to trust. And I'd point out a lot of people that I'd be like, stay away from them. These people will destroy you, and they don't care.
So Dan, the folk who are homeless are I think a lot of people have been homeless for many, many years, as you experienced as well too, right?
Yeah.
That's been their way. They've been homeless for a really long time. And it's like a whole other discussion for a whole other time. Our community that also suffers from addictions and mental health and poor physical health, right? So there's that complications that people deal with every day,
yeah.
which is hard, on top of being homeless. Yeah. So all of those issues too.
But one leads into the other. Like
right.
Homeless leads into the mental part of it, because you're always wondering where you're going to sleep, where you're going to eat, it kicks you into survival mode. And if you're not ready for survival mode, it will play havoc with your mental state. That coupled with the fact, if you don't have any background or training, like camping or anything like that, like if you grew up flat out in the city and you'd had no experience whatsoever, you'd be lost. Like you'd be basically one of the ones that would just wander around and not know what they do. Like I used to jokingly call them the zombies, because these are people that are just shell-shocked from the fact that they're now homeless, and they don't know what they can do or how to do it, that they literally walk around like zombies, just heads down, just they don't know. They don't know where to go, who to talk to, what to do. So.
Can you tell us how you came to be not homeless and came to be more involved with Arcade and those steps?
Well, before I started at Arcade, I was down by the river behind the jam factory on, what street is that? It doesn't matter. But I was down by the river, and I had a compound down there, which was me, and I literally had gotten 6 tents, and I had picked people off the street, and I said, here's a tent, come on down, you can stay here. And basically I had a big bonfire pit, the whole 9 yards, because I knew what I was doing. People would come down, they would drop off donations at my compound to hand out to the other 6 compounds that were in the area. So where I was, there was a grand total of about 50 people that were down in the area, but in 6 different compounds. And basically I ran security there. Like if somebody came down to cause trouble, it was, no, you don't do that, get out. But everybody had to basically follow the same set of rules and principles, because yes, homeless people do have rules, we do have principles, and you need to stick by them. Your morality, your humanity depends on it, because if you don't, it's not good. Survival mode is extensive, and it will take a toll on you. It will change you, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. Some people are able to turn off their emotions. When you're on the streets, yes, you got to turn off your emotions. Problem with that is that they come back when you least expect it. So
Someone approached you while you were in Tent City and connected you with Arcade and with...
Actually, no. I was debating on what I could do to change my life, because honestly, I was getting tired of being homeless. I guess that's about it. I was bored. I was tired. I didn't ask for money on the corners or anything like that. Like, I actually went out and did odd jobs to try and find money. And if I didn't do that, I didn't bother anybody. But I did sell narcotics. No offense to anybody here that would take that as an offense. I did it so I could eat, because not a lot of people do it for profit, all that stuff. No, I did it to eat. I actually raised my youngest son at one point. I had custody of him, the whole 9 yards, and while I was fighting CAS and all that, I was still paying for my youngest son to have a room while I slept on the street. But the selling of the narcotics actually fed us. My youngest son, it took a lot of years for him to realize that, but once he did realize that, he understood why I did it. Like, I wasn't happy to do it, but it did feed us. It took care of a need that I couldn't do on my own. So.
And then you gradually worked with Arcade, and they helped you find housing, the apartment over the...
Well, I walked in to Lois there the one day at the Y, and I asked them flat out, I said, are you guys looking for any volunteers? I said, because honestly, I'm bored out of my mind. I need something to do, or else I'm literally going to go back to this thing. Lois, God bless her, said, yeah, sure, we need some volunteers. What can you do? And I says, well, it's a shorter list. What can't I do? So she put me to work. And at the end of that day, it was a good day, she said, are you coming back? And I said, do you want me back? And she said, yeah, you were actually worked out. You were really good. So one day led into 2, led into 4, led into a month. And then it was there. They basically put me on as a full-time volunteer. So I did another 4 months of straight, like 8-hour to 10-hour to 12-hour days volunteering. And then a job came up, job posting, I guess you could say. And I was asked if I was going to apply for it. And I said, well, I don't know. How do you do that? So Lois basically took me by the hand and walked me through everything. And then I was hired on a part-time basis, I guess kind of like the 3 months thing at any other job or whatever. So I did that, and then I was hired on full-time. Basically, like Sue said, I ran the security and the door. And the reason I was put there is because I knew everybody. Like there wasn't any time that there was anybody there that I didn't know because of the community, the whole 9 yards. So as people were coming in, it was like, hey, Bill, hey, Tom, what's going on, Kenny? You know, that sort of thing. And they also knew me that basically homeless people, we got a weird sense of humor. We like to mess with people. And it's kind of funny that way that we just like to see the reactions on people's faces, believe it or not. When I was over by the Salvation Army, there's an outstanding joke over there called London's Homeless Safari, where people will drive past the Salvation Army and they'll slow down like they're at the Lion Safari out of town, and they'll gawk out the window and everything like that. And we used to joke around saying that London's Homeless Safari, we're wild. And a few people, you scare them a little bit, nothing major, you know, but it happens. Combats boredom where we're from. Most of us wouldn't harm anybody or anything like that. It's just something to do. But that was the outstanding joke, because honestly, who in their right mind likes to be gawked at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? I don't think anybody here would personally like that. I know I didn't.
So Dan, and I know it's a big question, but what would be your best guidance for us as church? And some of our folk work downtown or shop or go. What would be your best suggestion for what we as church can do to help our homeless population? Or the other term we use would be marginally housed, people who are in rooming houses, people who are couch surfing. So, if you have, what would you suggest for folk who are willing, and knowing that we as church, this church especially, geographically are not, because my sense is, and you can talk with me about this more, and Dan for sure at lunch, there's not a lot of homeless people in this neighborhood, right? There's
there is.
Yeah, there is, but we don't see them,
right?
But it's a distance from downtown, right? So
yeah.
what would you I know it's a big ask, a big question.
First off, I would say to basically watch, step back, survey the entire situation, figure out, who you might want to approach, and then walk up and introduce yourself. Homeless people are humans too. And a lot of us, myself included when I was homeless, I used to tell Sue this, I told this to anybody who came into the Y, get to know their name. Everybody likes to be called by their name, not that guy or the homeless guy or the bum or the hobo was a couple of them. Like I said, there's Bill, there's Ted, there's Kenny, and shake their hand. One story I'll tell you, this one guy that used to come down to the river where I was, and he asked me flat out, he said, what do you need? I said, well, I don't really need anything, which I didn't. It wasn't me that I had stuff for. I was actually giving stuff out because I could survive on, next to nothing. But this guy, his name was Roger. He pestered me and pestered me and pestered me for about a good month. Kept asking me, what do I need? What do I need? What do I need? And I kept telling him nothing. So finally I said to him, fine, you get me a black coffee. And he said, done. And off he went. And I thought, well, see you later, Roger. I probably won't see him again. And I didn't actually for about 3 months. Turns out that he ended up having a bit of a stroke and was in the hospital and all that. But by the time he had gotten out of the hospital, the first thing he did was come down to the river. And he showed up, and this is where the name thing comes into perspective. I looked at him and I says, "Hey, Roger, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while." And he goes, the drive-through was a little busy. Here's your coffee, by the way. And he still remembered that I wanted a black coffee, which I thought was fantastic. And he remembered my name, the whole 9 yards, shook my hand, and we sat there and we talked for about a half hour, 40 minutes, and he told me about a stroke and everything like that. And that's the reason why he was like 3 months late getting to me. And I told him, I said I wasn't too worried. I just figured it was like any other day where a lot of people, they say one thing, do another. And that's the main issue with being homeless, is you get used to that. You get used to being lied to, told that, okay, we'll help, and then nothing's done. The main thing is, if you want to help homeless people, if you're going to help them, help them. Get to know them, because we're not all drug addicts. We're not all mental, I guess you could say patients.
Yeah, people with mental health issues.
And we're not all evil. We're not all criminals. We're not, like, I knew people that were electricians, roofers, a couple of medical professionals, ex-ambulance drivers. We even had a couple that, where they were from, they used to be lawyers. And through bad investments, they ended up homeless because they couldn't pay their bills. Most people don't realize that if you were to take everybody in this room, all of yous, believe it or not, are only 1, maybe 2 paychecks away from being where I was. Like, even though I'm housed now with my own apartment and everything like that, and a full-time job, I'm still like borderline. Like, a couple of missed things, I'm back on the street for not paying rent or anything like that. It's hard. Like, it's hard when you first lose it, but you can deal with it. When it happens a second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, that's when you start to not care. And you start to basically think, well, this is where they want me, this is where I'm going to be. So what can I do? You either keep pushing forward or you die, because there's not many options where we're from.
And that's probably a good place to kind of wrap up a little bit. I think you also hit on, what the scripture talks about, always pray and not be discouraged. And I think you're right. It can be discouraging, but you're really encouraging us to remember it's our humanity. It's our one-to-one humanity. And you're right, how we get to know people and know them by name. And I know as I'm still, when I'm downtown, when I'm at Arcade, you're right, people know us by name, and you know people by name, and that connection is important.
Yeah, get to know their story, where they're from.
Because everyone's story is different.
How did they end up there? Because you'll hear quite the variety of stories. Everything from what I said with people in power to, there's one guy that's downtown right now. He actually won the lottery 15 years ago. And through a very bad divorce and some scrupulous family members, he got literally screwed out of his winnings. And his own family basically folded him up and said, "See you later, bye." And they left him penniless, homeless, and want nothing to do with him.
And one of the questions I was thinking about is, because as we, said, I always love that Mark called, you were a sign of hope for us. It would be, some days we don't see a lot of hope. Some people try, do you have a sense of how many folk are moving from homeless into getting some housing or marginally home? Like,
There's a few, and I do mean few, because not many have the dexterity or the mental capabilities to keep smiling and push forward. It's easier just to, put your head in the sand and go with everything else. Others have given up completely, which is basically they've tried everything and been shot down or beat down, robbed. Everything that they've had has been taken so many times, they give up. Willpower and hope are two commodities that people on the street can't lose. Once they lose them, you get the people in the doorways that are doing the drugs, laying in the middle of the sidewalk because it's the only way that they can be seen. They've been ignored, overlooked, and misrepresented so many times that they just say, F it. This is how they want to look at me, this is how I'm going to give them. And that's it, that's all. Like, when you beat your head against the wall so many times, one thing's going to give. It's either the wall or your head. And unfortunately on the street, it's usually the latter. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we offer at Arcade is that it is a place that everyone can come in, get food, have a shower, do laundry. There is the clothing exchange, there are the blankets and towels as we can. And there's also the commodities that we run out of all the time, shoes, jackets, mitts.
They also come for the safety feature of
Yes.
it and the community of it, because if you actually go down to Arcade and you were to see people sitting and all that, you'll see the same people sitting together because, well, by nature, we're community-based, right? We're not meant to be alone. Some of us can handle longer stretches, being by yourself and being able to count only on yourself and everything like that. Lord knows I did it for a long time, but I have the capability of that, whereas a lot of people don't. So they need to cling to something or somebody in order to help out. And you'll see communities within communities. And they come together for safety, for support, for help, really. I know when I was there, a lot of the clients would come up to me basically because they knew me. And Sarah she had explained to me that as my role would be, I would be a bridge. Basically, the population would come to me and I could point them to who to go to, whether that would be Sue, whether that would have been Lois, Tom, a few others. And I could at least point them in the right direction so that they didn't have to go through the repeated steps time and time again, because there's a lot of repetitive. The paper-ready thing is one. Most people, the reason they don't have their identification and whatever is because it's been stolen. And then when you only get so much money from welfare or ODSP, you got to buy food, what little clothing that you can, and then hopefully you have enough left over that you could still get this stuff. Fortunately now, the government is making it more easier that they can get their IDs and all that, but there was a long time where people just don't have the money to get it. And it all boils down to the money situation. It's just the way it is, I guess.
And we're going to, and thank you so much.
Friends, as we go from this place today, may we remember that the people we sometimes don't see are the people that God needs us to see. And Dan, I want to thank you for reminding us to see the humanity in the people that sometimes we walk past and ignore. So thank you for that. So friends, as we go, may we go in peace. Amen.